having a feeling that it ain't over when it's over. And I think while this isn't exactly the outcome many of us hoped for, it ain't over. In many ways, it may be just beginning. But we'll talk about that as we go forward. I may not be the first one to say, this is Trump's country, and we're just living in it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, elections have consequences, and we're about to see a fair number, many of which I think are going to be very distasteful and unpleasant. And so we've just, begun to see some names that I think some of which are pretty scary, some of which are, so what kind of thing. But I think one group, it's actually not a group at the moment, but this concept of an agency, a department of government efficiency, which sounds like an old World War II German government department. And I don't mean necessarily to equate them, but the fact is that I think with people like Musk and Vivek, who has come back in a whirlwind of enthusiasm, is a pretty scary possibility. So we'll have a chance, I think, definitely to talk about that. But I wanted to begin just briefly to kind of summarize where I think we're winding up. The count isn't over. They're still counting in California. I have to say, I really don't get that. I mean, everybody votes by mail in California. And it's not clear to me why they're still counting 5 or 6 races for the House, and actually still counting ballots for the overall election. So this is a map that finally wound up. Somebody pointed out to me, and it's certainly true, we've seen worse maps in our lifetimes. Going back, we saw, I think, in one of Reagan's terms, we saw just one blue state. So we've seen maps that are...
That was Nixon's second time, Massachusetts only.
And yeah, Massachusetts, that's right, Massachusetts only. And so, I mean, it is kind of what it is. They're still counting. The last count that I saw showed Trump with 50.2%, 75.5 million. Harris with 48.1%, 72.3 million. I think she'll come up. I don't know how much, but it's possible. That's just a 1.5% differential. And it's possible it'll go down a little. But there we are. As we know, we had a sweep, not the Green Bay sweep that what's his name used to talk about before he went to jail, but We had a sweep of the swing states, which went to the right. And so if you look at these numbers, the big numbers, this was smaller, the differential smaller than Obama's elections, smaller than Bush in 2004, smaller than Clinton in 92 and 96, and maybe smaller than Clinton in 2016. We're not sure of that yet. But compared to 2020, where Trump lost by almost 5%, this is a huge swing. So, as you know, because you've all been either reading or watching or maybe having an adult beverage in between, there's been a lot of conversation about why, and I don't want to beat that into the ground, but I think there are some things that are worth pointing out. I do believe, based on what we're seeing, and based on some of the appointments that have already been made, I mean, Mike Huckabee as the ambassador to Israel? I said to myself, what is that all about? So, Mike Huckabee is a religious zealot who's a gun nut. That's just a wonderful introduction to his participation in the Middle East. I mean, what kind of thinking? And then we see some comments on TV that he made back in 2015 to the effect that, quote unquote, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. So that's a good introduction to what we can expect from Mike.
Settlements.
And
there's no such thing as the settlement.
yeah, so that's a, that's a complete disaster. And this fellow who came out of Fox News, who's just been announced for Secretary of Defense, is another kind of, whoa, John Ratcliffe at the CIA, his name is spelled R-A-T, Cliff, and it's appropriate. He was one of the guys who was mentioned by the gal in Trump's office who testified about the goings-on at the end to the committee in Congress. Thank you, Cassidy Hutchinson. And she said that Ratcliffe was supportive of the activities going on in the White House to overthrow the government. So putting him in the CIA is also perfect. We know that Wray, who Trump appointed to the FBI, is going to be gone. And there's talk that this guy, Kash Patel, who's another one of those blow everything up guys, may wind up there. But we'll see. That hasn't happened yet. There are a couple of appointments that, I mean, if Rubio becomes Secretary of State, I don't think the world will disappear. But I think, basically Trump is his own Secretary of State. How long Rubio would last is, I think, kind of an interesting question. Indeed, how long any of these folks last, because it looks like Trump is going to try and bypass the Senate on all of these appointments, basically take out the whole concept of approval that has been with us the whole 240 some odd years. To this morning's Senate meeting to determine who is going to lead the Senate going forward will be interesting, because there are actually three candidates: Scott, Thune, and who's the third guy? Oh, right, Corn, from Texas. So, I mean, these are terrific candidates, right? Scott ran the largest for-profit healthcare company in the world, and the company was fined $2 billion for defrauding Medicare and Medicaid. So he is certainly capable of running the Senate. No question about that. Thune is another guy who basically everybody hates. Next to Cruz, he's the most hated man in the Senate. So he's another, genius that I think the one interesting thing about Thune is that he's a McConnell guy. And so these votes are all taken in private. Nobody puts their hand up in front of everybody else. Everybody fills in a box or something, and then somebody, interesting question, probably the parliamentarian, actually counts them. So really none of these three people are what we would call great Americans and going to be great leaders. They're going to be, at best, in the measure of someone like McConnell, and at worst, they'll do precisely what Trump says whenever he says it. And they'll be on the other end of the phone ready to say yes or no, sir, on any occasion. So we'll see what happens.
Filibuster in the Senate.
What's that?
Democrats have 60 votes filibuster in the Senate.
No.
Oh, they do?
No.
Oh, they don't?
No, they don't.
The point is they can do a filibuster. I didn't say it right.
Well,
They can do
they could. I think the answer is, I think it's possible. It's possible that Trump will do away with the filibuster, which would be an interesting byproduct of all of this.
How can you do away with it? Yeah, how could you?
Well, he can get enough Republican senators to vote along with some Democrats who would love to see the filibuster gone. So, I'm not predicting that's going to happen.
Is that a 50-50 or is it?
No, it would basically eliminate. What they've done is they've cut that. You can only now use a filibuster for legislation. You can't use it for appointments. So, and remember, they cut it back for, Supreme Court justices. And so I think that what will happen in the Senate is uncertain, but I think that there's still a very small possibility that Bob Casey could pull out the election in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's not officially called, and he's losing by about 30,000 votes, but according to the campaign, and I think the state, there are over 100,000 votes still uncounted that are overseas ballots, provisional ballots, and some mail-in ballots.
There's a pretty good chance of winning.
So there's a thought that he would have a chance yet of pulling it out. My guess is if that happens, we'll see a recount, and this could go on for some time. But I think it's not over yet. And that actually, I think that would be a good thing, but it doesn't really change the margins in the Senate. So it'll either be 52 or 53 Republicans and either 48 or 47 Democrats.
Harry Link didn't win. That's good news.
Well, but she's still governor because I saw that the seventh court, the seventh ruling against her appeals was handed down this week. She's lost all 7 of them. So I'm sure on her tombstone will be former governor of Arizona. So anyway, fortunately she lost, and I think we could probably say that's a good thing. So I just wanted to show one other slide here. Well, the only other thing I would say is that if you look down on the coast, the only blue spots are really, obviously there are a couple in the middle. And what I find interesting is there's only one of these states that's not on the water, and that's Colorado. Every other blue state has some kind of a coastline. Even Illinois, you know, on the big lake there. So I think that's interesting. And maybe there's an opportunity for New England to secede. I think that would be a great thing for the class to undertake. And I'd be willing to lead that movement. So that's something for another class, and some more adult beverages. So, as I said in my email, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, the House. That looks like, the last figure I saw was 221 Republicans, 213 Democrats. So we're not sure, but there'll probably be a difference of a half a dozen votes, maybe, in the House.
Could be even then.
And, well, yeah, it could be, but I think according to the races that are still open, basically they'll probably fall close to half and half, so it'll be somewhere around half a dozen votes. Now in New Hampshire, I think this is interesting, and I thought not helpful. You know, the Republicans expanded their majority in the legislature here. It's now 222 to 178. In the Senate, it's still 16 to 8. And in the Executive Council, it's still 5 to 1. That's all Republicans. So, 4 to 1. Thank you. 4 to 1. So, so this was not successful in any sense of the word if you were a Democrat. It could have been worse, but somehow that doesn't make it really, I think, any better. You know, there's a saying to the effect that an election is an ancient technology for finding out who your neighbors are. And there's certainly some truth in that. Another phrase that I saw that I thought was interesting was that the Democrats had a good product, but terrible packaging and distribution. So we might talk a little about that. I think that most of us would agree that Harris ran a damn good campaign. It wasn't perfect. She made some mistakes, but in 107 days, it was a damn good campaign. However, she had a number of things who were not in her favor. She had a president who was, at one of the lowest levels of approval ever. And she was right on the approval level problem because she was a part of that administration. And one of the big problems she had was distancing herself from Biden. And if you go back a little, you can think about what if, and just for a moment, a couple of what ifs. When Obama's term was ending, 2 terms, of course, 2008 and 2012, he had a choice. He had a vice president who he had been meeting with weekly for 2 years, and he had a former Secretary of State and the wife of a former president, and he chose Hillary Clinton to run that race. That turned out to be an unfortunate decision. If Biden had run that race, we don't know, but it's conceivable that we would now be in a position where Biden would have been finishing his 2nd term and Trump never would have happened. Now, that's a what if. Another what if is when Biden was running in 2020, you'll remember he hadn't done well here in New Hampshire or in Iowa, and he went down to South Carolina and he made a deal with Jim Clyburn. And that deal was, I will appoint a black woman vice president. And Jim Clyburn went out and all the dominoes fell in the right direction for Joe Biden. What would have happened if he hadn't made that deal? Maybe that 2020 campaign wouldn't have rolled out that way. Maybe that was the deal that he needed to make in order to get the support that he needed in 2020. We don't know. But those 2 interesting decisions, I think, will be the stuff of history as time goes by. And I think I don't know who will write those books, but I think we'll learn more about the background there and how these things came about. But it is things like that that make politics so interesting and unpredictable. Martha?
The other thing was you agreed that the Democratic primary would be in South Carolina. And I don't think there ever was a real Democratic primary this year. There wasn't for Harris, but even for Biden.
No.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I think, the primaries just, there was the whole issue, of course, of what was happening in New Hampshire, which was really kind of funked. It never really happened.
Democrats, it did for the
right.
Republicans,
That they wound up, basically forgiving the fact that the Democrats had made a boo-boo. But I think that's true. So politics is not, you don't plug in the answer to the question as you might do in a physics course or a math course or something like that. Duncan.
The other big it was if in the fall, it had to be what year? If summer a year ago, Biden said, I don't plan to run again. Yes. And there had been a real Democratic primary with a new candidate who, wasn't necessarily the vice president.
Yep.
That candidate would have done better. I don't
So,
know.
so I think that's another if. There was some, I think Biden talked a little bit in the 2020 run-up about this being a transition term. He never said, I think, I'm only going to serve 1 term, but he implied that that might well be the case. And I think, you know, what was the date of the debate was what, July 21st, 27th? Anyway, in there. There was a 3-week period after that debate when, you know, a lot of people knew or thought they knew that he should retire. It took him 3 weeks to do it. Would those 3 weeks have made a difference? I don't think so. Another 3 weeks, I don't think. And could they have run a full-fledged primary in that time? No way. No way. I think there's a pretty darn good bench out there, whether you're looking at senators or governors or possibly even some former cabinet members. And I think we'll, as we go forward, maybe we'll talk a little bit about them. I think that what I've kind of said is this wasn't a red wave, but it's a red tide. Those of you who live along the ocean will know that. You know, it kind of stinks up the whole place and makes it uncomfortable and poisonous in some cases. But I think this was more of a red tide than a wave. And, of course, the red wave in 2022 never happened. So this was a kind of a fallback, as it were, to that. So anyway, what I'd like to do is, I think, turn our attention to another topic, which I think is important, and that is what we think is going to happen now, what Trump is going to do, likely to do. He's just now beginning to make some appointments, and we're not sure how those all will wind up, but let's talk about some of these things, because I think they're critical. They're going to be important to our lives. And one of the things that the Republicans have been very good at is communications. And they're apparently actually reviewing these candidates on a TV screen, I think a large screen, where these people are basically performing for Trump and the inner circle, maybe Musk and Vivek and others, I don't know. But this group of people who they're selecting are, in general, people who are good communicators. You know, we can look at somebody like Kristi Noem, for example. I think the agency that she's been picked to head has more employees than the state of which she was governor. So the likelihood that she's going to be a good administrator, I think, is very remote. She's also the one, you'll remember, who shot her dog in the gravel pit when the dog didn't do what she thought he should do. So, and I also have a picture in my mind of her dancing on the stage while Trump was trying to remember where he was. So I think that's not a good photo, but you know, that's where we are.
She's also not allowed on the tribal lands.
Oh, I think that's right. She's not allowed on the tribal lands. But I suspect if she wants to go on the tribal lands, that's not going to stop her. So the very first thing I think that Trump is looking at is the border, right? And he's got this guy, Bob Homans, who's really quite an unpleasant character, who we know from the last picture. And of course, Stephen Miller, who we also know from the last picture, who's now back in a chief policy role in the White House. And there's 11 million people that they're targeting. I saw this morning, and I was actually a little surprised, that half of those people, 5.5 million, they believe are Mexicans. I thought I was surprised by that number. I thought the number was more diverse. That's the number that they at least claimed. And they said they were going to use the old Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, which haven't been used in 100 and some odd years. And one of the, actually 3 of the 4 sections of that act have been canceled by Congress. But one section is still open. And that section, as I read it, says that the only way you can return people to their country is if we are, if not at war, that at least we are having problems with. In other words, we just can't pack up people and send them if we don't have if we have a relationship with them, a good relationship. So the question, one question I think is, what's going to happen to our relationship with Mexico? And that's pretty important. We have a huge trade relationship with Mexico. And not to mention the huge, and you know, the commerce that goes back and forth over the border every day. So what are they going to do with these people? They're going to pick them up, and they have to house them somewhere first. They've got to identify them. They've got to house them. And now, you know, they're talking about there are these private prison companies who have been disastrous in our corporate history. Companies like Wackenhut and other names that you may remember, who have been basically just reorganized into the same kinds of folk. So they will in-turn, presumably, these people in some way, with or without family. We don't know. We don't know for how long. How will they be clothed, fed, treated? We know the answer to that. Horribly. And eventually, they'll be put on, well, if it's Mexico, they can be put on buses or trucks or trains. But they don't have to be put on airplanes, for example, like if they're going back to Venezuela or Central America or wherever else, an island in the Caribbean, where they would have to be transported in other ways. So we have all of that to look forward to. And the economic implications of that are huge. There are 11 million of these so-called unlawful immigrants. We don't know if they're truly unlawful. And we've got 11 million open jobs in this country as we speak. So it doesn't take a genius to say, why can't we make some kind of an arrangement here, at least in a gross way, so that we can try and match up jobs with opportunities? I mean, some of these people, many of them have been in the country for a long time, many working for a long time, many probably paying Social Security for a long time. And these people could be excellent workers for many, if not most, of these jobs. Yeah.
But will the senior corporate people in big agriculture,
Yep.
the hotel industry, the restaurant chains, whatever, will those corporate people who might, I'll say be on the Republican side of the fence. Well, they say to come down and say, listen, this is gonna really screw up our business.
So I think that's
Can't be listened to.
I think that's a fair question. I don't know the answer to that. We have, I mean, you've got the agribusiness, you know, the slaughterhouses and the, all of, from what we're led to believe, that whole industry is loaded with those kinds of folk. And I think the answer is we don't know until we see what happens. But if they literally walk into these plants and just bring everybody out, those plants are going to shut down. I don't think they've got replacement workers anywhere for these people. So that could have a huge impact on our food supply, et cetera. Dick?
Department of Efficiency solve that?
Well, I suspect that they'll have plenty to say about it. But you know, how they're going to relate to any or all of this is a complete unknown. I mean, are they going to build up, for example, a huge organization, you know, or are they going to be two guys on a gun range, you know, just basically blasting at the targets? So I don't know. Was there a comment? Yes. Okay.
Probably some of you were listening to the radio last night, heard what I did, which was that in places where they had these raids before, they're making plans, like the spouses and stuff, in case their husbands are taken away. So, you know, who will do the child care and how will they get to these prison-like places, things like that, so that they're saying that they're not gonna be caught unprepared the way they were. But my other question is, what, if anything, can we do? I mean, I thought, well, maybe I can give some money to the ACLU or something like that, but you're a lawyer, I don't know.
Whatever you do, don't give money to lawyers. That's right.
I try not to.
Yes, Betty.
They've been doing that in Germany all along. But I know it's a small country.
Doing what?
Employing these people that came in.
Oh, yes, yes.
Checking what they can do, and then they send them to school even if necessary, and they put them into jobs. I know it's a smaller country, but they had quite a bit of people coming over illegally.
Well,
from Africa.
many of the European countries have had serious immigration issues.
Yes.
They've taken lots of people.
But they integrated most of them.
Well, I think many have been integrated, but I think many of those countries today are putting up barriers saying we've got enough. So, but you point out correctly that some of those countries have been successful in integrating large groups in the past. But I think another thing to consider is that the results of this election really follow the results of other elections around the world. There's a movement right, certainly all over Europe, arguably in the Far East, and these things have a tendency to kind of come and go, move back and forth. But clearly, we're not alone in this, but because of our size and economic impact, what we do will impact many more than what the other countries will do to us. So, yes, Carol.
I just want to understand, so these illegal immigrants, isn't it possible that some of them have citizenship or have applied for citizenship?
Well, I think anything is possible, and I think the immigration system is so unnecessarily complicated. That's one of the problems with it. And the legislation that was drafted and famously killed by Trump in the last term, was supposed to have been a major piece. I have to admit that I haven't read it, but it was supposed to have been a major piece and way to solve many of the problems. For example, creating many more immigration judges, because one of the problems is the backup. People are waiting for years, literally, and what happens to them is they fall through the cracks. They disappear. And that's how they get to wherever it is they wind up, because the system isn't prepared to resolve their issue. They can't sit around literally for years and do nothing, so they disappear and find jobs and live with friends or family or wherever, and start to create a life. So it's quite complicated. Yes?
I'm just wondering, would you care to say anything about what you predict right-wing social media on the right will do now that the Democrats are in power, and it will become a little more difficult to generate conspiracy, anger, and rage?
Well, I think one thing they will do, for sure, is they will take credit and have Trump take credit for the economy. Suddenly, in 6 weeks, instead of being, a terrible economy, we will have a great economy. Absolutely, that's going to happen. They're going to turn it around in 48 hours.
Do you think that gets them listeners?
I'm sorry?
Will that get them listeners?
Well, I think it will, for a few days, it'll it's like slapping somebody with a wet fish. I think they'll get it, whether they'll believe it or whether they'll even understand that it's the same story, only it's a different tale. So, but I think one of the things I learned is that in this election is that the right wing has dozens of media outlets that we, for the most part, never see, hear about, watch, whatever. And those media outlets are listened to by, I think, millions, but certainly many, many people around the country, including particularly young people and people of color. Particularly younger people of color, because they're platforms on phones, for example. So, if we watch whatever it is, CNN, MSNBC, we're the only ones watching that. Yeah. Nobody else is watching that. So, if you go on Joe Rogan and have the strength to get through 3 hours, he's got, 30, 40 million people who are listening to him every day? I mean, that's a lot of people. And it's not just the number of people, it's who they are. I think we have a situation, we all believe that we've seen what kind of a guy Donald Trump really is and has been all his life. I think we now have a situation where many young people want to be like Donald Trump. He can do anything. He can say anything. He can lie 100 different times about the same thing in an hour and a half, and nothing sticks to him. He is the epitome of the urban cowboy today. Remember when he said, I can, on Fifth Avenue, I can go out and shoot somebody? And he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that says more about us, I think, than it does about him. He's been allowed all his life to slip through All of those court cases are going to disappear. All of them will disappear. And I think he'll wind up paying no money to anybody. It'll all be gone. And we're seeing that in a different way with a guy like Howdy Rudy, you know, Giuliani, who's walking around. I mean, he's given up his condo. I don't know whether you read, when they went into the condo, there was nothing there. They had unloaded all the stuff. I mean, that's such an old trick, stunt in the bankruptcy court. I mean, that's been going on for forever. How could they have allowed that? They knew that was going to happen. And yet, it happened. And these ladies, they're not going to get anything from Rudy. It's sad to say, very sad to say. But Trump is the grand wizard of all of that. And I think he's a folk hero. You know, he's like, I don't know, whoever you want to, compare him to, a Robin Hood or a whatever. But I think, and we've had the resources, but we haven't had the talent, and we haven't gone after that in the way that we might have been able to make some gains. And I'll tell you, I think one of the most important questions that we should ask here today is, what's going to happen in 4 years? Are we going to have another election? I think that's a real question. I don't know the answer to it, but I think, depending upon what's happened, it's not impossible that there will not be an election in 2028.
Lay out the scenario, how we would get there.
I think we could get there in a lot of ways. We could get there, the same way that, or we could have an election where there was one party. That's it. How do countries get there? They do it. And, if anybody doesn't like it, it's kind of sue me. So I think, again, I'm not predicting it's going to happen. I'm saying it's a question that should begin to be addressed today by the Democratic Party. Because if we have a committee of government efficiency and we wind up saving $2 trillion or whatever the number is, and we have a tariff of, who knows what percent, we're going to see real serious inflation in this country. And we're going to see a lot of other problems develop, social problems. And I think what's going to happen is that in many of these states, you've got Republican governors who aren't going to push back, who are going to do exactly what they're told. And I think that there are real potential problems in terms of which direction we're going to be. Yes, Rob.
There is another thing on the other side that's hard for us to keep remembering, is that Trump starts right out as a lame duck. And that's not going to make much difference in the first year. But by the last year, normally it does make a difference with lame ducks. So that's just something.
Well, when Trump, yes, I think that's a point. Of course, when Trump is inaugurated, he will be the oldest president ever inaugurated. He will pass Joe Biden. Not by a lot, but by enough. So something could happen to him during the course of the term. There's no question about that. But I think that's a different question. And there's a potential of a bench there already with JD and a Senate and a House. Now, I think it's worth pointing out, and I've alluded to this, for example, in 2004, there was a year where Bush won a real victory. It looked a lot like this, and the Democrats were moaning and groaning, and you know, it was the end of the world. And let's not forget that many people thought that Bush was the worst president ever until the former guy, who is now the future guy. So I think, and so what happened? In 2008, Obama came along, and it was a whole new world. I mean, in '04, Obama wasn't even a factor. So that's not impossible. That's not, you know, and it's not so far in the past that we can say it never happened. It actually happened several, yes, Carol.
There are issues that will impact all of us indirectly, is things like the national debt.
The national debt.
National debt.
Yes.
And other things, such as, which I've heard on public radio this week, the fact that Trump has backed out of international health and
Yeah.
and climate.
Climate change.
Climate things.
So he could, for example, there's still the question of whether, you know, what he's going to do with NATO. And I mean, I think one of the things we've seen, I think it's quite clear, there can be a settlement of the Ukraine situation so long as the Ukrainians are willing to do what Putin wants them to do. They're now talking about, you know, the possibility of giving back the Donbass and Crimea, but I think Putin isn't going to be satisfied with that. He's going to want more, absolutely. And, you know, we're going to be faced with that problem. Imagine, as we have seen, all of the destruction over the last 2 years, all of those people who have been killed, all of their lives ruined. And in the end, we walk away basically saying, well, we're sorry it didn't work out. But I think that's a real possibility. And similarly, in the Middle East, I think that Netanyahu and you know, this, I think we're going to see what could possibly be the reality end of a two-state solution. See the Gaza Strip basically, you know, be destroyed. And so it's easy to win a war that way if you basically say to the other side, we don't give a damn about you, and we're going to, you know, we're just going to wipe you away. And I think, I mean, and then, of course, we've got our old friends in the Far East who are looking at us and waiting to see what they can get away with. If we're willing to walk away from Ukraine and from the Far East, from the Middle East, are we really going to stand up for Taiwan? I mean, are we really going to do that? I think it's an open question. If I were in South Korea, if I were in Japan, if I were in Australia, if I were in the Philippines, I'd be very concerned about those questions, very concerned. So let's take a break of 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and begin to kind of wind this up. One of the disappointments that I at least felt in this in the outcome here was the voting by women. And 45% of the female vote went to Donald Trump. And I mean, I have to say that I just don't get that. I don't understand it. It's set, as we've said before, 7 of the 10 states, actually 8 if you include Florida, because they did get a 57% majority, but not the 60%, but passed the referenda for their state to incorporate protection for abortion. And yet, those women went on, many of them, to vote for Donald Trump. And I just can't get my mind around that. Bev?
One of the things that I saw in this election also seemed to be a backlash against feminism, that a lot of young men voted for Donald Trump because, and this is what I heard on television, they were feeling threatened that there are more women in college than young men now, and so they are lost because of feminism. And your grandson doesn't seem to be lost because of feminism, but I guess if you're working class, you are. I don't know.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I don't know the answer to that. It's interesting if you look at the history of feminism in this country going way back. Some of the most ardent anti-feminists have been women. I mean, I remember Phyllis Schlafly and, you know, folks like that who, you know, fought against the Equal Rights Amendment. And I mean, I never really got that. But that concept is kind of reintroduced and even heightened because of the kind of a background that Trump has and his attitude toward women and the way he has always treated them. Incidentally, I don't know if you saw, but I'm reminded there was a little snippet today in the, where did I see it? Somewhere before I left, that Melania has indicated that she does not expect to spend much time in Washington. So that is another kind of interesting tidbit. Whether she'll remain in Mar-a-Lago or I have no idea. But anyway, I thought that was another interesting kind of piece. Yes, Martha?
One thing, if she doesn't spend much time in Washington, what happens to the Secret Service? Do they have to cover him and her? So
They do.
double
They do.
expense?
That means we pay for it. Big time.
There was a big problem with that when she stayed in New York when he was appointed the first time, and Congress had
Especially in New York.
had to appoint or had to approve
Right.
more money for New York
That's
because New York just couldn't pay for it.
Right, that's correct. Yes, Bill?
As you just did, we often talk about how many people in different groups voted for whom. How do we really know that? Because your voting ballot doesn't indicate your background.
Well, that comes mostly, I think, from exit polls. And, you know, and this is part of a discussion that we've had, but in general, exit polls are thought to be fairly reliable. So when people come out of the voting booths, out of the area, there are people assigned to, approach every 5th or 9th or 15th person and talk to them.
I think they also have records of who voted. I think they can calculate it to the person. I mean, they release records. They don't, of course, nobody knows how you voted, but they release records, and I think they're doing that now. That's what I read here.
Well, there are, I mean, certainly in in any town or any area, I mean, there are records of who voted. So you can tell, at least, you can get a pretty good idea of certainly the number of, let's say, men and women who voted and what the vote count was. So you can get an idea through that. Yes. No, go ahead.
You can't identify who voted for who.
No.
No,
I
of course you don't
worked
have
at
that.
No.
for years. No, it's not that specific.
Right. But you can identify
That's
the number of women and the number of men who voted.
It takes time to do that.
Yes. So, yes, Betty.
I think the Democratic Party should take time now to examine what exactly happens that so many people turn to it.
So Betty says it's time for the Democratic Party to go through a re-examination. I think with what we've heard in the last week, I think there's a general agreement that that should be the case. I think this goes back to what happened, for example, with Bush in 2004. It goes back to other times when both parties either party was suffering from a loss. Newt Gingrich, for example, when he came in, reorganized. And so I think there's no doubt that's going to happen. I think it needs to happen. One thing I would say is I think that the party needs to find a chairperson who can effectively lead this group. We've had some chair people who have been perfectly adequate, not bad, maybe even B+, but it's been a while, I think, since we've had somebody who was really a dynamo and a So I think it needs to start at the top. I think that somebody mentioned my grandson. I think you'll remember he was involved in this race in Nebraska where this independent candidate actually wound up doing very well. He didn't win, but he caused a lot of commotion in Nebraska, made the Republicans spend money there and time they didn't want to spend. And he attended a meeting in New York on Monday of a group of Democratic folk. I don't know who was there. But there is a movement to create a PAC or super PAC, i.e. some real money, to fund independent candidates for Senate in red states going forward, because they believe that there is something to be gained, and that that might be a strategy, clearly not an only, but a strategy that might be able to generate some funding, and they might be able to find some interesting people in those states who would be willing to run for office. So that's just one little thing. Obviously, it would have to be part of a much larger kind of concentration.
One of the problems with that, though, is they always ask the candidate who they're going to caucus with. So this guy in Nebraska said he wasn't going to caucus with either party. So then what happens?
Well, I mean, that's part of the, that's part of the issue. So the independents in this election got, I think Stein got, what, 500,000 votes or something? It was a modest amount. I didn't really check. I don't think she had an effect in any of those states particularly. But, and Bob Kennedy Jr. got 500,000 votes after, telling everybody he wasn't going to run, and he didn't mean it, and all of that stuff. And incidentally, we haven't mentioned him, but that's another, I think, kind of fly in the ointment, because I don't know which agency or agencies he's going to be responsible for and what that means. But he is certainly someone who I think we don't want to see running our health affairs. That would be, I think, a most unfortunate situation. Carol?
This fact that I heard, and I can't define what the source is, but I heard that Elon Musk's X station online
Yeah.
is being, I don't know, closed down or being rejected by a lot of stations or vehicles for communicating it, and I was really shocked to hear that.
I think they moved from X to Blue Sky or
Yeah,
something like that.
Yes.
So I haven't heard anything about that. I can't comment on it. All I know is that he had, what, was it 20 million followers, I think, through this election, and that he was pushing a lot of this right-wing stuff, which was, being eagerly awaited, and that people were relying on that, or apparently listening to it, along with the Rogan and other similar stuff. I think the Democrats are going to have to find ways to either start those kinds of ventures and fund them, or in some way to coordinate with, I don't know how to coordinate with them, but it's not enough clearly to be on CNN or MSNBC. I mean, that's, and the Times, the reach of the Times and the Post, is, let's face it, it's on either side of the country or whatever, and it's minimal. Yes, Dick?
I think a lot of people in this room and liberals underestimate how many Americans want a strong man, with man being the emphasis. There are a lot of people who are very anxious, and they want someone who can punch back.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump, compared to Kamala, is obviously fits that bill.
Yep. Bob?
It seems to me, in looking back, that the Republicans have had kind of a long-term strategy on multiple fronts that were sort of under the radar. And Dems maybe can learn something from it, but they put a lot of emphasis on media. When media got deregulated and the talk radio started and they were talking directly to people. They put a lot of emphasis on the judiciary, seating Federalist Society folks all throughout the judiciary. And they put a lot of emphasis on down ballot stuff, local stuff. Whereas the Dems, I don't know, it's the identity politics and the rightness of us or cause or something, they just weren't connecting with all those red areas.
So I think those points are very good points. I think that the Dems, the Republicans, this goes back to the Obama years actually, began to put a lot of effort into the lower level, the down ballot stuff, particularly in the states and in the local communities, so that the state legislatures and the school boards and all of those things. And now that's beginning to pay off. Actually, it's paid off.
Education.
Big time, right, education, et cetera. And of course, with the courts, we find not only with the Supreme Court, but with courts all over the country, through the Federalist Society and all the money that they raised and developed, and that whole program, there is a Democratic program, but it pales in comparison to what the Republicans have done. So we've been, the Democrats have been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and they need to come together in a major way. And one meeting in a room isn't going to do it. It's going to have to be a lot of folk coming together and thinking seriously about. Yes, Connor.
Well, maybe you talked about this last week, but we haven't talked about racism and sexism. And one thing that I read made the point that Republicans are talking to a pretty unified group, and Dems are trying to represent a much wider variety of people. You know, this man referred to identity politics. Well, there are a lot of different kinds of people, and the Dems are trying to include them more, and it makes it harder because the other people are saying, you know, make America white and Christian again. So.
Well, this gender identity thing has been kind of a, that ad that the Republicans ran, I don't know, 35 million times or some such crazy number, with that very tall trans person playing, I think, basketball with a bunch of girls. I mean, this is I mean, the Democratic Party is a big tent, and you've got the progressives on one side. I mean, they beat Harris to death with some remarks that she had made in 2019, I think, which were unfortunate for the election. But, I mean, I ask you, if we're talking about 5-year-olds or 8-year-olds or 12-year-olds, what is it? And they're playing kickball out on the yard. Why is it that girls can't play with boys? I don't get that. In the first place, I always remember that when I was that age, the girls were always bigger. That was to start with. So, I find, and then, I don't know how many of you remember Renee Richards? Does that name mean anything to you people? Renee Richards was, I think in 1976, some such time, was an early trans, and he played in the Women's Open, if I'm not mistaken. He was 42 years old. And he didn't win. He won a couple of matches, I think. And there was a huge outcry. Oh my God, what a disaster. The whole world of tennis is going to change. There hasn't been a single other trans tennis player ever in the Open. Ever. In the Olympics, there are, I saw some number, 21,650 women athletes in the last 20 years. One person was a trans athlete. One person. why are we all worked up about this? What happened here? I mean, so I think this is I think this is an example of something that is, quote unquote, completely out of control, but was taken as a, you know, it was a, it's like the story, and again, I read this morning in Louisiana, they're trying to put up in every classroom a copy of the 10 Commandments. So the Supreme Court ruled a long time ago that that was absolutely verboten, and now they're coming back again with a whole new package. And given this court, anything is possible. But, you know, they had that shot of this young trans person who was very tall, playing basketball, and, you know, fathers saying, you know, I don't want my daughters, you know, banging into this person on a basketball court. So, and this was a huge issue in the campaign, I think, and in polling, this was a very major factor, yeah.
Well, you know, I personally feel that saying if you're transgender you can't play on the team is fine, because not every kid makes the team. There are a lot of kids that don't make the team, and their parents are like, okay, they're not. So I've never quite understood why we go out of our way to support something like that when we really don't necessarily have to. Would that kid die if he didn't get to play on the team? No.
So I suppose not. I guess the answer to that, or the response to that question, I guess, is, well, this kid will be on the team because in basketball, height is very important. So the likelihood is that he or she or whatever, don't get me started on the pronouns because I'm completely lost, and I could go to jail for what I say or don't say. So I'm completely lost with the pronouns. But I think, as I say, if we're talking about younger folk, I don't understand it at all because it makes no sense. And then at another level, it seems to me there ought to be a way to come to grips with this. And well, we're not talking about a lot of people here.
But another thing, I'm going to show my prejudice.
This is a good place to do it.
I believe in gay marriage. I think you should love who you love and, you know, be committed to who you love. But I still have problems with my wife, 2 wives in a family, 2 husbands. Why can't you just be partners? What is that need to call your significant other husband? To me, husband and wife has always had a sexual connotation to it. So why is there need to do that? I'm just asking.
No, you can ask. That's why we're here. I think that's why we're here. Anybody want to respond to that? Yes, Colin.
I am really glad that people are allowed to be who they are and live the way they want to live. And if somebody is trans and wants to play basketball, I'm all for it. And we're talking probably about a she right now, and that people are objecting to, should be able to try out for the team and get on just like everybody else. I think that's freedom to let people be who they want to be.
Yes, my friend Duncan.
Given some of these issues that have caused some challenges for the Democratic Party.
Yes.
They've been used.
Yes.
Is it time for a party that's less progressive to be formed with rhinos? I mean, are there people in this country who are not enthusiastic about Trump, but can't quite identify as a Democrat?
So I suspect the answer to that is probably yes. Is there a way to bring those people together? to
The
either,
National Party or something.
well, whatever we would call it, what'd you say, a rational party? Sandy?
Traveling, living in the South for a while and traveling down south every winter, up here we're in a bubble where women are very strong, independent, and there's a lot of women that believe in the women's lib movement and this kind of thing. But across the country, and what I see when I'm down south in the winter, and there are a lot of women from the Midwest and that kind of thing, they all love Trump. And the reason, when I ask them why, they say because he makes us feel like he can protect us. He makes us feel like we're, so they like that tradition. That's 45%. And you try and say something to them. They're really sold on that. They really, and I don't think the Democratic Party makes them feel safe. It makes them feel, secure. Like they want to feel that it's an old traditional thing that's still there. We're still fighting, and the women are still fighting it here, I know, but I mean, you see that a lot, and that's what 45% was.
Yes.
This is kind of a follow-up. I mean, I don't mean to ignore that, but a follow-up to the question about how can these fragments find a place in a two-party system.
Yeah.
Do we track regularly what I call null votes or write-ins or ones that are voting for neither?
None of the above?
Yeah, one way or another. I think locally we can see how many null votes, people who did not even vote for a presidential candidate.
Well, those numbers are available.
Are
I
they
mean,
tracked?
in the towns, those of you who have been supervisors, I think you have to list the, Mickey Mouse or whoever else they vote for. So you can track those, but I think, I don't have a base of knowledge to know, but if I had to guess, I would say those numbers are typically really not significant. They're mostly people who are, unhappy with the system. They want to register a complaint, and this for them is better than simply not voting. In other words, I want to put in Mickey Mouse or whoever it is they put in, or they vote for themselves or whatever. So,
is that trended? Is there a trend?
I don't know of
Study
it.
that?
I don't know of any.
On
Ross?
the issue of creating additional parties, I'll ask the same question, and if someone asks a question about should we have another party to take another party for the Democrats, I'll ask the same question about the Republicans. Should there be another party for the non-Trump Republicans? There are a lot of them around.
Yes.
So I think that the best answer that I can give to that is not, you have to judge this for yourself, is that historically in this country, we've never really been able to generate a significant third party. You'll remember, even Teddy Roosevelt, when he came back and after going to Africa and deciding that, Taft was not his man anymore. Even he couldn't do it with the popularity that he had. And I don't, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's, these parties are, and I think the Republican Party, as we all remember it, and certainly as I remember it from a much earlier time, doesn't exist anymore. This is a completely unrelated party. So it doesn't mean they can't use the name, or it doesn't mean that there aren't people in the Republican Party who might want to join another party. But I guess the question is, who's going to do that? And I mean, as we look at people who are in Congress, for example, or who are in the Senate, or who are in our state house, just for an example, I don't see people in those positions who I certainly don't know many of those people, but I don't see that kind of emerging suddenly. Which, yes.
But you were talking about promoting a lot of independent candidates.
Yep.
Isn't this kind of the seeds of a new party?
Well, I suppose that's not inconceivable. There's a difference between independents and third-party candidates. Historically, for example, Jill Stein, who has been running for some years on the Green ticket, you know, that's one thing. I remember Ralph Nader ran on that ticket, and then he ran later as an independent. And Bobby Kennedy ran, he started out running as something and moved to something. But so technically there's a difference, because the independent, and somebody brought this up, the independent might not want to say who he or she, for example, is going to caucus with in the legislature, which is an issue, definitely. So you raise an interesting question, but I don't know what the answer is. I think where independent candidates would have the benefit, that's one side of the coin. They have the benefit of not being tied to a party, but that's also that's probably, they're giving away an opportunity to raise money through a party process. Much harder for an independent to raise money than it is for a party. But I would say, if my understanding of this other thought that I had brought into the conversation was they were trying to raise money now on the front end, you know, for 2026. I have no idea how much, but we have to be talking about serious money if they're talking about, you know, 6, 8, 10 candidates, whatever it may be. So
in doing that, they support the independent candidates, but could there be a Democratic candidate running at the same time?
Well, I think I guess the answer to that is, I don't know. I think the impetus for this was that there were red states where there weren't Democratic candidates of significance, and that's where they wanted to concentrate their efforts. Now, again, it's just one, you know, stroke in a whole potential plan. So I think that we kind of, I mean, there's definitely, the Democratic Party needs to reassess. And they need to bring together as many people as they can, not necessarily in one place the whole time. I'm not suggesting that. But have meetings all over the country, in every state, in every possible way, to talk about what the party and its members can do. And they should open that up to independents and anybody else who wants to join. I don't think it should be. Maybe there are disaffected Republicans, yes.
We always have Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
We do.
Yes, true.
Bernie is a wonder in and of himself. He is. And he is amazing. He is amazing. Well, I'm not sure the best way to wind this up. I think one thing I want to do is I want to thank each and every one of you. Many of you have been coming for a long time to these classes. I've been doing them for 11 years. Over 30 courses. I think I figured out the other day I had occasion 275 classes, something like that. It's more than I can even begin to imagine.
What's going to be your next one?
Well, so I'm not doing anything in the winter. And I haven't decided about the spring, but I've been thinking about something a little offbeat. And so I'm just gonna throw something out, and then I'm gonna step back and don't throw any tomatoes. But I have done some offbeat classes in the past, which I think were great fun and people enjoyed. And so I've been thinking about doing something that would be really fun, you know, where we all wouldn't sit around and moan and groan, and all of that. And one of my favorite characters in the world of music is Frank Sinatra. And so I've been thinking about Old Blue Eyes, and I think that it might be fun to do a course where we combine the music, obviously, with the story of his quite unbelievable life. So that's a thought, and I just throw that out, possibly for the spring. I want to wish you all a very happy and healthy holiday and new year. I am very conscious after a week of very unfortunate health news from unrelated but people who I knew well, that getting old is not for sissies. And I don't know about you, but I'm not getting any younger. So I want to wish you all a very happy and healthy time. I hope we can see one another, and we'll see one another again. And I want to thank you for your support over all these years. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.